The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor as my sister announced her engagement to my fiancé. My parents erupted in cheers while I stood frozen watching 3 years of my life crumble. But as I quietly gathered the broken pieces, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The inheritance documents scattered beneath the table bore signatures I had never seen before. My name was completely missing from everything. Before we dive into how I uncovered the truth behind my family's ultimate betrayal, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Have you ever discovered something that completely shattered your world? Hit that like button if you are ready to see how karma served the sweetest justice, and subscribe, because this revenge story gets absolutely wild. My name is Sage Morrison, and until that October evening, I believed I was the beloved daughter of successful real estate moguls, Patricia and Robert Morrison. I had spent 28 years building what I thought was an unshakable bond with my family, working 60-hour weeks at their company, while my younger sister Melody pursued her art degree, with our parents' endless financial support. The engagement dinner was supposed to celebrate my upcoming marriage to Derek Hamilton, the man I had dated for 3 years. Instead, it became the night that revealed the most devastating betrayal imaginable. As I knelt on the cold kitchen floor collecting champagne glass fragments, those scattered documents caught my eye. What I saw made my stomach drop to the floor. The papers clearly showed the transfer of our family's multi-million-dollar estate to Melody exclusively. Every property, every investment account, every business asset, all signed over to her name alone. The dates on these documents went back 2 years long before Derek and I had any relationship problems. This was not a recent decision born from disappointment in me. This was a calculated long-term plan to cut me out completely. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone, my heart hammering against my ribcage. 28 years of working holidays, skipping vacations, and sacrificing personal relationships to build the Morrison real estate empire meant absolutely nothing. While I had been expanding our portfolio and securing multi-million-dollar deals, my parents were secretly planning my financial execution. But the inheritance theft was just the beginning of what I would uncover that night. Hidden beneath the property transfer documents was a folder marked Sage, Employment Termination. Inside were detailed plans to fire me from the company I had helped build from a small local business into a regional powerhouse. The termination was scheduled for the Monday following my supposed wedding. They had planned to destroy my personal life and professional career simultaneously. The cruelest detail was a handwritten note from my mother. Once Sage is married, she will become Derek's financial responsibility. The transition should be seamless if we time everything correctly. Melody deserves the business she has been denied for too long. Denied Melody had never shown an ounce of interest in real estate. She spent her days painting watercolors and complaining about how boring business discussions were at family dinners. Yet somehow in my parents' minds, she deserved everything I had earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. As I continued reading, I discovered the most shocking revelation of all. Derek had been involved in these discussions for months. Email chains showed him actively participating in conversations about my termination and the timeline for claiming spousal rights to my personal savings account. My fiancé, the man who claimed to love me unconditionally, had been planning to financially devastate me as thoroughly as my own family. The conspiracy went deeper than simple favoritism or inheritance disputes. Derek had been systematically copying my client file's business strategies and proprietary market analysis. He planned to launch his own competing real estate firm using my work, my relationships, and my reputation. The man I trusted with my heart had been stealing my professional life piece by piece. I realized that my humiliation at dinner was not spontaneous. Melody's engagement announcement was carefully orchestrated theater designed to shatter me emotionally before they destroyed me financially. They wanted me broken, isolated, and completely dependent on Derek's mercy. Mercy that would never come, Standing in that kitchen, surrounded by the debris of my shattered champagne glass and my shattered illusions, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not confront them immediately. I would not demand explanations or plead for reconsideration. Instead, I would quietly document everything, gather irrefutable evidence, and plan my counterattack with the same cold calculation they had used against me. That night, I discovered that blood loyalty was nothing but a convenient fiction my parents used to manipulate me into building their empire before handing it over to their truly favored child. But they had made one critical error in their planning. They had taught me everything I needed to know about business strategy and ruthless execution. The following Monday morning, I arrived at Morrison Real Estate with a completely different perspective on everything around me. Every smile from my parents felt like a mask hiding their betrayal. Every casual conversation with Derek became an opportunity to gather more evidence of his treachery. I had transformed from a trusting daughter and fiancé into an undercover investigator in my own life. My first priority was securing copies of all company financial records before they could be altered or hidden. As the senior partner responsible for client relationships and market expansion, I had legitimate access to most company documents. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically copied every file contract and financial statement that might prove relevant to the conspiracy against me. What I found exceeded even my worst expectations about the scope of their betrayal. Derek had not only been stealing my clients' strategies and market analysis, but he had also been secretly meeting with our biggest clients, positioning himself as the true architect of deals I had negotiated. Email records showed him taking credit for 3 major property developments that had generated over $4 million in commission revenue for our family business. More disturbing was the discovery that my parents had been actively undermining my professional reputation behind my back. They had been telling clients and business partners that I was becoming unreliable due to wedding planning stress, and that Derek would be taking over my responsibilities soon. They were destroying my credibility in the industry I had devoted my entire career to building. The financial documents revealed the most sophisticated aspect of their scheme. My parents had been gradually transferring company assets to accounts that excluded me, creating a paper trail that would make it appear as though I had never been a legitimate partner in the business. They were not just planning to fire me. They were planning to erase any evidence that I had ever contributed to the company's success. But as I dug deeper into the financial records, I uncovered something that changed the entire dynamic of my situation. My parents had been engaging in systematic tax fraud for the past 5 years, underreporting property sale values, and inflating business expenses to avoid paying their fair share of federal and state taxes. The evidence was undeniable, and the potential penalties were severe enough to destroy their business and personal wealth completely. Derek's involvement in the tax fraud made him equally vulnerable to criminal charges. His copied files contained detailed records of falsified property appraisals and manipulated closing statements. He had not just been stealing my work, he had been participating in federal crimes that could result in years of imprisonment. The scope of their criminal activity was breathtaking in its audacity and stupidity. They had been so focused on their plans to betray me that they had documented their illegal activities extensively, creating a comprehensive case for federal prosecutors. Every email, every falsified document, every manipulated transaction was meticulously recorded in company files. Armed with this evidence, I realized that my situation had shifted dramatically. I was no longer the victim of a family betrayal fighting for my fair share of an inheritance. I was now a whistleblower sitting on evidence of federal crimes committed by people who had trusted me with access to their most incriminating secrets. The poetic justice was overwhelming. My parents had trained me to be meticulous, thorough, and strategic in all business dealings. They had taught me to document everything, verify all transactions, and never trust verbal agreements. Now, those same skills they had instilled in me would be the tools I used to expose their criminal enterprise. I spent sleepless nights organizing the evidence into a comprehensive report that would be impossible for authorities to ignore. property appraisals that differed by hundreds of thousands of dollars between tax documents and sales records, business expense reports that claimed personal luxury purchases as legitimate company costs, client files that showed systematic manipulation of closing dates to shift income between tax years. The evidence was so overwhelming that I began to understand why my parents were so desperate to remove me from the business. As someone with intimate knowledge of all company operations, I represented an existential threat to their criminal enterprise. They needed me gone before I accidentally discovered their illegal activities, or before federal auditors decided to examine our books more closely. Their betrayal was not just personal. It was essential to protecting themselves from prosecution. By destroying my career and crediting Derek with my achievements, they could eliminate the one person who knew enough about their operations to expose them while simultaneously installing a co-conspirator as my replacement. The realization that my entire family had been willing to destroy my life to protect their criminal activities filled me with a cold rage that motivated every decision I made moving forward. They had not just betrayed my trust. They had treated me as a threat to be eliminated rather than a daughter to be protected. The evidence I had gathered was powerful, but I knew that confronting a well-connected family with significant financial resources would require more than just documentation. I needed allies who could amplify my voice and ensure that justice would be served regardless of my family's attempts to minimize the consequences of their actions. My first strategic decision was to reach out to Marcus Webb, the former company accountant, who had been mysteriously terminated 6 months earlier. My parents had claimed that Marcus was incompetent and prone to making errors that could have damaged our business relationships. Now I suspected that Marcus had discovered their tax fraud and had been eliminated before he could expose them. Finding Marcus required careful detective work since my parents had insisted that all company employees cut contact with him immediately after his termination. I eventually located him through professional networking sites and arranged to meet him at a coffee shop far from any locations where we might encounter Morrison Real Estate Associates. Marcus's reaction to my phone call was initially suspicious and guarded. He had clearly been traumatized by his sudden termination and was reluctant to discuss anything related to Morrison Real Estate. However, when I mentioned that I had discovered evidence of systematic financial irregularities, his entire demeanor changed. The meeting with Marcus confirmed my worst fears and provided even more devastating evidence than I had originally possessed. Marcus revealed that he had been meticulously documenting the tax fraud for months, preparing to report it to federal authorities when my parents discovered his investigation and fired him immediately. They had threatened him with lawsuits and professional destruction if he ever spoke about company financial practices. Marcus had kept copies of everything despite their threats. His records included detailed spreadsheets showing the exact amounts of unreported income, falsified expenses, and manipulated property values going back 7 years. The total amount of evaded taxes exceeded $2 million, making this a case that would definitely attract serious federal attention. More importantly, Marcus provided context that helped me understand the timeline of my parents' betrayal. The tax fraud had been escalating rapidly over the past 2 years, as business grew and profits increased. My parents had become increasingly paranoid about discovery and had begun viewing anyone with access to financial records as a potential threat. Their decision to eliminate me from the business was directly connected to their growing criminal liability. Marcus also revealed that Derek had approached him months before his termination, asking detailed questions about company financial practices and record-keeping procedures. Derek had been gathering intelligence about potential vulnerabilities in their tax fraud scheme, positioning himself as someone who could help protect my parents from discovery, while simultaneously planning to use that knowledge for his own benefit. The second ally I cultivated was Rebecca Stone, an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing financial crimes in family-owned businesses. Rebecca had built her reputation by uncovering corruption in companies that appeared successful and reputable from the outside, but were actually engaging in systematic criminal activity. Rebecca's interest in my story was immediate and intense. Family betrayal combined with federal tax fraud represented exactly the kind of complex, emotionally compelling story that her readers craved. More importantly, Rebecca had established relationships with federal prosecutors and tax investigators who could ensure that evidence would be thoroughly investigated rather than buried or ignored. Working with Rebecca required me to be extremely strategic about timing and presentation. We needed to coordinate the release of information in a way that would maximize impact while preventing my family from destroying evidence or intimidating potential witnesses. Rebecca helped me understand how to document everything in ways that would be admissible in court and compelling to prosecutors. The third crucial ally emerged from an unexpected source, David Morrison, my father's estranged brother who had been excluded from the family business 20 years earlier, following a dispute over business ethics. Uncle David had always maintained that my father was willing to cut corners and engage in questionable practices to increase profits, but family loyalty had prevented me from taking his warnings seriously. When I contacted Uncle David and shared what I had discovered, his reaction was both vindicated and heartbroken. He had suspected for years that my father was engaging in criminal activity, but had been unable to prove it or convince anyone in the family to investigate. My evidence confirmed suspicions he had harbored for decades. Uncle David provided historical context that revealed this tax fraud was not an aberration, but part of a long pattern of unethical and illegal behavior. He shared stories of previous business dealings where my father had manipulated contracts, misrepresented property values, and exploited legal loopholes in ways that suggested a complete disregard for honest business practices. More importantly, Uncle David offered something I desperately needed: financial independence and emotional support during what would inevitably be a devastating confrontation with my immediate family. He owned a successful construction company and offered me a position that would allow me to rebuild my career while pursuing justice against my parents. The network of allies I had assembled represented different aspects of the comprehensive strategy I needed to ensure justice. Marcus provided irrefutable evidence of criminal activity. Rebecca provided media exposure that would prevent my family from quietly resolving the situation through private negotiations or intimidation. Uncle David provided financial security and family support that would allow me to withstand whatever retaliation my parents might attempt. As I prepared for the next phase of my plan, I realized that my parents' betrayal had inadvertently connected me with people who shared my commitment to integrity and justice. The family I was losing through their criminal behavior was being replaced by a chosen family of allies who valued honesty and accountability above personal convenience. The irony was perfect. My parents' attempts to isolate and destroy me had actually introduced me to the support network I would need to expose them completely. 3 weeks into building my case against my parents and Derek, I felt confident that justice was within reach. Marcus had provided additional financial evidence, Rebecca was preparing her explosive exposé, and Uncle David had given me the emotional strength to see this battle through to the end. My network felt unshakable, which made the devastating betrayal that followed even more crushing. The first sign that something was wrong came during what should have been a routine strategy meeting with Rebecca at her downtown office. She seemed distracted and uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact while reviewing the latest evidence Marcus and I had compiled. When I pressed her about the timeline for publishing her article, she delivered news that made my blood run cold. "Sage, I need to be completely honest with you," Rebecca said, her voice lacking the fierce determination that had characterized all our previous conversations. "I have been contacted by your parents' legal team. They are threatening to sue me and my publication for libel if we move forward with this story without giving them an opportunity to respond to these allegations." The legal threat itself was not surprising. I had expected my parents to hire expensive attorneys once they discovered my investigation. What shocked me was Rebecca's obvious fear and hesitation. This was a woman who had built her career by taking on powerful people who tried to intimidate her into silence. Her sudden reluctance to proceed suggested that my parents had leverage I had not anticipated. "There is more," Rebecca continued, her hands trembling slightly as she closed the folder containing copies of all my evidence. Your parents have also provided me with information about your mental health history that they claim makes you an unreliable narrator. They have medical records showing that you were treated for depression and anxiety during college, and they are suggesting that your current accusations are the result of psychological instability triggered by wedding planning stress. The sophistication of this counterattack was breathtaking in its cruelty and effectiveness. My parents had not just hired lawyers. They had crafted a comprehensive strategy to destroy my credibility by weaponizing the mental health treatment I had sought during a difficult period in my early 20s. They were using my responsible decision to seek professional help as evidence that I was fundamentally unreliable. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. Rebecca explained that Derek had contacted her directly, claiming to be concerned about my psychological state and offering to provide additional evidence of my alleged instability. My former fiancé was not just participating in my parents' criminal enterprise. He was actively helping them destroy my reputation and credibility. Derek provided them with copies of text messages and emails where you discussed feeling overwhelmed by work stress and family expectations. Rebecca continued. He also gave them recordings of private conversations where you expressed doubts about your parents' business practices. They are presenting these as evidence that you have been planning to make false accusations for months. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I struggled to process the full scope of what Derek had done. He had been systematically documenting my private thoughts and concerns, creating a record that could be twisted to make me appear unstable and vindictive. Every moment of vulnerability I had shared with him had been weaponized against me. Rebecca's final bombshell was that she would not be able to proceed with the article unless I could provide additional evidence that would withstand the legal and credibility challenges my family was mounting. The evidence Marcus and I had gathered, while compelling, was not sufficient to overcome the character assassination campaign my parents had launched. The meeting with Rebecca left me feeling more isolated and vulnerable than I had at any point since discovering the conspiracy against me. One of my most important allies had been neutralized through a combination of legal intimidation and strategic character assassination. My parents had demonstrated that their resources and ruthlessness exceeded anything I had anticipated. The situation deteriorated further when Marcus contacted me the following day with equally disturbing news. He had been visited by investigators claiming to represent the Internal Revenue Service, who informed him that cooperating with my accusations could make him an accessory to filing false reports with federal agencies. The investigators had convinced Marcus that helping me could result in criminal charges against him. Sage, I am sorry, but I cannot risk my family's security for this fight, Marcus explained during a tense phone conversation. These investigators made it clear that I could face serious legal consequences if the evidence I provided turns out to be inaccurate, or if your motivations for making these accusations are determined to be personal rather than genuine concern about criminal activity. I realized immediately that these so-called investigators were almost certainly private security personnel hired by my parents to intimidate Marcus into withdrawing his cooperation. The sophistication of their approach suggested they had experience in corporate damage control and witness intimidation. My parents were not just defending themselves. They were conducting a professional-grade campaign to destroy my case before it could gain momentum. The loss of Marcus as an ally was catastrophic because his financial expertise and documentary evidence were the foundation of my entire case against my parents. Without his cooperation, I was left with copies of documents that I could not authenticate and accusations that would appear to be motivated by personal grievances rather than genuine concern about criminal activity. Uncle David remained supportive, but even he began expressing concerns about the wisdom of continuing to pursue accusations that were becoming increasingly difficult to prove. During a painful conversation at his office, he suggested that I might be better served by quietly accepting a settlement and rebuilding my life rather than risking complete personal and professional destruction. Your parents have resources and connections that we cannot match, Uncle David explained with obvious reluctance. They have turned this into a battle where the costs of fighting may exceed any possible benefits of winning. Sometimes, tactical retreat is the wisest strategy. The pressure to abandon my pursuit of justice was overwhelming, but surrendering felt like betraying not only myself, but everyone else who might become victims of my parents' criminal enterprise in the future. However, I was forced to acknowledge that my current strategy was failing completely. I needed a fundamentally different approach if I had any hope of exposing the truth. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with evidence that no one would help me present, and allies who had been systematically neutralized, I realized that my parents had taught me one final lesson about ruthless strategy. They had shown me that victory sometimes requires completely changing the battlefield, rather than continuing to fight on terrain chosen by your enemies. Just when defeat seemed inevitable, salvation came from the most unexpected source imaginable. 2 days after my conversation with Uncle David about tactical retreat, I received a phone call that would completely transform my situation and provide me with the evidence I needed to expose my family's criminal enterprise beyond any possibility of denial or cover-up. The caller identified herself as Jennifer Martinez, a senior investigator with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Her first words made my heart race with a combination of terror and hope that I had not experienced since this nightmare began. Miss Morrison, we understand that you have been attempting to report suspected tax fraud involving Morrison Real Estate, Jennifer said in a crisp professional tone that commanded immediate attention. We would like to meet with you to discuss information that has come to our attention through our ongoing investigation of your family's business activities. The revelation that the IRS was already investigating my parents independently was so shocking that I initially suspected this was another intimidation tactic orchestrated by their legal team. However, Jennifer provided specific details about company financial records and transactions that convinced me she was legitimate. The federal government had been monitoring Morrison Real Estate for months before I had even discovered the conspiracy against me. Our meeting took place at a secure federal building downtown, and Jennifer was accompanied by 2 other investigators who specialized in complex financial crimes involving family-owned businesses. The scope of their investigation exceeded anything I had imagined, and the evidence they had accumulated made my documentation seem rudimentary by comparison. We have been tracking irregular patterns in Morrison Real Estate transactions for over 18 months. Jennifer explained as she opened files containing hundreds of pages of financial analysis. Our investigation began when several property sales involving your company were flagged by our automated systems for unusual pricing discrepancies and timing irregularities. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of tax fraud going back 9 years, far longer than Marcus and I had suspected. My parents had been engaging in systematic criminal activity almost since the founding of their business, progressively becoming more sophisticated and audacious as their success grew, and their confidence in their ability to avoid detection increased. More importantly, the federal investigators had independently verified every piece of evidence that Marcus and I had gathered, and they had uncovered additional crimes that we had not even suspected. My parents had been engaging in money laundering through shell companies, structuring cash transactions to avoid reporting requirements, and falsifying loan applications to secure financing based on inflated property values. Jennifer revealed that Derek's involvement in these crimes was far more extensive than I had realized. He had not just been stealing my work and participating in tax fraud. He had been serving as the primary liaison between Morrison Real Estate and the network of accountants, appraisers, and attorneys who facilitated their criminal activities. Derek was not a minor co-conspirator. He was a central figure in their entire operation. Your former fiancé has been under federal surveillance for 6 months, Jennifer explained while showing me photographs and financial records that documented Derek's criminal activities. We have recorded conversations where he discusses specific strategies for concealing income and manipulating property valuations. His cooperation was essential to the scope of fraud your parents were able to achieve. The federal investigation had also uncovered the truth about the intimidation campaign that had neutralized my allies. The individuals who had approached Rebecca and Marcus were indeed private investigators hired by my parents, but their actions constituted witness tampering and obstruction of justice. My parents had committed additional federal crimes in their attempts to prevent me from exposing their original criminal enterprise. Jennifer informed me that my efforts to document and report my family's criminal activities had actually provided federal investigators with crucial confirmation of evidence they had been gathering through other means. My insider knowledge of company operations and access to internal records had helped them establish intent and systematic patterns that would be essential for successful prosecution. Your cooperation could be instrumental in ensuring that we can present the strongest possible case against your family, Jennifer explained. However, we want you to understand that testifying against your parents and former fiancé will likely result in significant personal and emotional consequences that extend far beyond this investigation. The federal investigators offered me something that none of my previous allies had been able to provide: complete protection from retaliation and guaranteed prosecution regardless of my family's resources or connections. The power of the federal government was sufficient to overcome any intimidation tactics or character assassination campaigns my parents might attempt. More importantly, Jennifer revealed that I would not be alone in testifying against my family. The federal investigation had identified 3 other victims of Morrison real estate fraud clients who had been systematically overcharged and manipulated during property transactions. These victims were willing to testify about how my parents had exploited their trust and stolen significant amounts of money through falsified contracts and inflated fees. The scope of my parents' criminal enterprise was far more extensive than I had imagined, and the number of people they had victimized was large enough to ensure that their prosecution would receive significant media attention and result in severe consequences. This was not a case that could be quietly settled or minimized through expensive legal representation. Jennifer also provided me with information that explained why Rebecca and Marcus had been so easily intimidated. My parents had hired a corporate crisis management firm that specialized in destroying the credibility of whistleblowers and journalists who threatened powerful clients. Their tactics included legal harassment, character assassination, and systematic intimidation designed to make the costs of pursuing truth appear to exceed any possible benefits. However, federal protection meant that these intimidation tactics would no longer be effective. Anyone who attempted to interfere with my cooperation in the federal investigation would face additional criminal charges. My parents' strategy of silencing me through fear and isolation had backfired completely by bringing me to the attention of investigators with the power to protect me and prosecute them. The meeting with federal investigators transformed my understanding of my situation completely. I was no longer a betrayed daughter fighting alone against my family's conspiracy. I was now a federal witness whose testimony would help deliver justice to multiple victims of an extensive criminal enterprise. The personal betrayal that had motivated my initial investigation had evolved into something much larger and more significant. As I left the federal building that day, I realized that my parents' attempts to destroy me had inadvertently led to the exposure of crimes that law enforcement might never have discovered otherwise. Their betrayal had not just cost them a daughter. It had cost them their freedom, their fortune, and their future. 6 months after that life-changing meeting with federal investigators, I stood in a packed federal courthouse watching my parents and Derek being sentenced for their crimes. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as he delivered justice that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations about accountability and consequences. The defendants engaged in systematic criminal activity spanning nearly a decade. Judge Harrison declared as he reviewed the evidence that had been presented during the 3-week trial. Their actions represent not just theft from the United States Treasury, but betrayal of family bonds and professional relationships that form the foundation of ethical business practices. My father received 12 years in federal prison for tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My mother was sentenced to 8 years for her role in the financial crimes and additional charges related to witness tampering. Derek faced 15 years for his central role in orchestrating many of the fraudulent transactions and his attempts to obstruct the federal investigation. The financial penalties were equally devastating. The court ordered the forfeiture of all Morrison real estate assets, including the family home vacation properties and investment accounts that had been funded through criminal activity. The total restitution exceeded $8 million, ensuring that my parents would emerge from prison with nothing remaining of the empire they had built through theft and deception. But the courtroom drama was just the beginning of the transformation that followed their convictions. The media coverage of the Morrison real estate scandal had attracted attention from business leaders and entrepreneurs who admired my courage in exposing family corruption despite the personal costs involved. Rebecca Stone, who had initially abandoned our collaboration due to intimidation, reached out to apologize and request permission to write a comprehensive article about my experience. Her piece, titled "The Daughter Who Chose Justice Over Blood," became one of the most widely shared investigative journalism pieces of the year and established me as a symbol of integrity in an industry often characterized by corruption and nepotism. The article led to speaking opportunities at business conferences and universities, where I shared my story as a cautionary tale about the importance of ethical leadership and the courage required to challenge corruption even within families. These speaking engagements evolved into a consulting business, helping family-owned companies establish transparent governance practices and whistleblower protections. Uncle David offered me a permanent position as chief operating officer of his construction company, but our relationship had evolved beyond simple employment. He had become the father figure I needed during the most difficult period of my life, providing emotional support and practical guidance that helped me rebuild my sense of family and belonging. The most unexpected blessing emerged from my collaboration with the federal investigators. Jennifer Martinez had been so impressed with my analytical skills and attention to detail that she recommended me for a position with a private firm that specialized in forensic accounting and fraud investigation. This career path allowed me to use the skills my parents had taught me while directing them toward protecting victims rather than enabling criminals. Marcus Webb, who had been terrified into initial silence, eventually found the courage to testify during the trial and played a crucial role in securing convictions. Our shared experience of standing up to intimidation and choosing truth over personal convenience created a bond that developed into a deep romantic relationship. We understood each other's commitment to integrity in ways that people who had not faced similar challenges could never comprehend. The chosen family I built through this experience proved more loyal and supportive than the blood relatives who had betrayed me. Jennifer became a trusted advisor who helped me navigate the complex emotions of rebuilding my life after such devastating betrayal. Rebecca evolved from journalist to friend, using her platform to highlight the importance of supporting whistleblowers who risk everything to expose corruption. 6 months after the sentencing, Marcus proposed to me during a quiet dinner at the restaurant where we had first met to discuss evidence against my parents. The irony was beautiful. The investigation that had begun with discovering my fiancé's betrayal had led me to a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect rather than manipulation and exploitation. Our wedding celebration was intimate and meaningful, attended by the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Uncle David walked me down the aisle, Jennifer served as my maid of honor, and Rebecca officiated the ceremony. The contrast with the family gathering where my original nightmare began could not have been more profound. The final chapter of this story came when I received a letter from my mother during her second year in federal prison. She attempted to apologize for the pain they had caused while simultaneously suggesting that their actions had been motivated by concern for my future happiness. Even facing the consequences of their crimes, my parents could not acknowledge the full scope of their betrayal or accept responsibility for the choices they had made. I chose not to respond to her letter. Some relationships cannot be repaired, and some betrayals cannot be forgiven. However, I felt no bitterness or anger about that decision. The family I had built through shared values and mutual respect provided all the love and support I needed to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. Today, my forensic accounting firm specializes in helping families avoid the kind of corruption that destroyed my original family. We work with business owners to establish ethical practices and transparent governance that protect both financial assets and family relationships. Every case we handle reminds me that the choice between integrity and personal convenience defines not just business success, but the quality of relationships that make life meaningful. The greatest lesson from my experience is that family is not determined by blood, but by shared commitment to treating each other with honesty, respect, and genuine care. The people who stood by me during my fight for justice became my true family, while the relatives who prioritized money over morality revealed themselves to be strangers wearing familiar faces. Looking back, I realized that discovering my parents' betrayal was actually a gift that freed me from relationships built on manipulation and false loyalty. The pain of that discovery led me to people and experiences that enriched my life in ways I never could have imagined. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you actually need. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? What would you do if you discovered that the people closest to you had been planning to destroy your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I love hearing about how others have handled impossible situations with grace and courage. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in the darkest moments. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the family we are born into. Thank you for joining me on this journey from devastating betrayal to hard-won justice. Remember that your integrity is worth more than any inheritance, and the people who truly love you will support your commitment to doing what is right, even when it is difficult. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort and truth over temporary peace.